thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in my first day in Brazil. So I discovered Brazil with my friends Pierre and Gerard. I enjoy it. Okay, so the main goal of my lecture is to prove this theorem of Mostow. So the formulation I will give is quite different from the formulation that Gerard gave, but essentially the same thing. So let gamma 1 and gamma 2 be two co-compact lattices of the group of isometries of the real hyperbolic n space. Then any abstract isomorphism between phi, between gamma 1 and gamma 2 is a conjugation by an element, by an isometry. And first, I would like to describe the sketch of the proof. So we will follow the ideas of Mostow. And I will follow also a paper by Gromov and Pensu. So the first step, as explained Gerard, is from phi, we construct a phi equivariant quasi-isometry on the hyperbolic space. So this step is quite classical now. The second step is to show that F induces a quasi-conformal or quasi-Möbius homomorphism on the sphere. But for me, the sphere is in fact the boundary at infinity in the sense of hyperbolic geometry. So this result is sometimes called Margulis. The third step consists in proving that, in fact, this quasi-conformal homomorphism, say F, small f. So first, F is differentiable almost everywhere. It's called Radomarov-Stepanov theorem. And in fact, we prove then that F is conformal. And the last step is to use Liouville theorem. So this theorem has been mentioned by Gerard. It means that the conformal group of the sphere, which is also the Möbius group of the sphere, is in fact some sense, the isometry group of Hn. And the proof is complete. Because the isometry here is in fact small f. Okay, this is the sketch of the proof. So what I will do in this lecture, so the plan of the lecture, is the following. So first, I will recall some tools from quasi-conformal analysis. So if you are not familiar with quasi-conformal mappings, don't worry, I will recall basic things about quasi-conformal mappings first. In the second part, so in particular, I will explain what is Rademacher-Stepanov theorem, what are quasi-conformal homomorphism, what are quasi-Möbius homomorphism. In the second part, I will speak about quasi-conformal geometry, on quasi-conformal, on quasi-hyperbolic, geometry. In particular, I will sketch a proof of this theorem of Margulis. So we will use Quest ratio, Boozman function, and so on to prove this result of Margulis. And in the third part, I will speak about rigidity. So in the third part, I will prove the result of Mosto. So the main, what we have to do is just to prove that F is conformal. The other part will be considered before. And the key point here is that all these tools of quasi-conformal analysis, quasi-hyperbolic geometry, will be, I will define all these notions, all these tools, in a very abstract setting. I mean, in the setting of metric measure spaces. The idea is that in the third part, I would like to show you how to get rigidity results, not for manifolds, but for other spaces. For example, fiction buildings. Those are Tits buildings equipped with a Gromov hyperbolic metric. And in this case, we don't have a Riemannian manifold. We have only metric spaces. And we have to deal with this abstract setting. So I start with quasi-conformal analysis. So today we will do analysis, but not very hard analysis, I think. Quasi-conformal analysis. So the first tool is called modulus of curve families, of a curve family. So it's a classical object in quasi-conformal analysis. So let X d mu be a metric measure space let gamma be a curve family in X, and let P a real number which is greater or equal to 1. I define what is the P modulus so the P modulus of gamma is the infimum over some function rho of the integral of rho to the P with respect to d mu. where the infimum is taken over all Borel functions rho from x to 0 plus infinity, so that the integral of rho over any curve in my curve family is bigger than 1. So gamma is a locally rectifiable curve in gamma. I don't take for any curve in gamma because it does not make sense to consider this integral when gamma is not locally rectifiable, because you need a good parametrization by arc length to compute this. So this means that if gamma is a set of not locally rectifiable curve, in this case, any rho is admissible. I should mention that rho is called admissible for gamma. So if gamma is a set of curves that are not locally rectifiable, any rho is admissible, so the modulus is 0. On the other hand, if gamma contains a trivial curve, that is a curve which is reduced to 1 point, there is no admissible function. And in this case, we said that, by convention, we said that the modulus is plus infinity. Okay, some basic properties of the modulus. The first one is that the P modulus of the empty family is 0. The second basic property is that if gamma 1 is contained in gamma 2, then the P modulus of gamma 1 is then the P modulus of gamma 2. The third property is that the P modulus of the union of some collection of curve families is less than the sum of the P modulus. So you see that these three properties mean that the P modulus is an outer measure on the set of family curves. Okay, so that is a property of an outer measure. Maybe some comment. This property is obvious. This one is obvious. So I leave this as an exercise, but it's not. Maybe it's not so easy. The first property is that if gamma is a curve family, or maybe no. Gamma and gamma prime are two curve families such that any curve in gamma contains a subcurve in gamma prime, Then I would like to compare the two modulus. Then, so if I have if rho is admissible from gamma prime, then rho is admissible for gamma, of course, by the definition here. So the p modulus of gamma is less than the p modulus of gamma prime. So I'm using just the definition. Okay. I should mention that in general, in a metric, if you take a metric space, in general, you don't have curve families with non-trivial modulus. That is, you have modulus equal to 0 or plus infinity. Okay. Now I go to what happened in the Riemannian case. So in this case, X is a Riemannian n manifold. And I suppose that M is equipped with its Riemannian volume on the Riemannian distance. Okay? And the fact that if F from M to, sorry, the Riemannian manifold is conformal, so this means that the tangent map is an homothétie. So F preserves angles. Then the modulus of gamma, which is called the conformal modulus, so I don't put a subscript here, but with my definition here, it's the modulus that corresponds to p is equal to n is equal to the n modulus of the image of this family. So the n modulus, or the conformal modulus, so by definition the conformal modulus is the n modulus, is invariant under conformal mappings. Yes, and conformal invariant. To prove this, you have to prove, in fact, two inequality. But by symmetry, it's enough to prove one inequality. And to do this, the idea of the proof, let sigma be an admissible function so f of gamma is f in the image of the curve of gamma. So set rho is sigma composed with f, the norm of the differential. So we have to check that rho is admissible. It's just a change of variable by using the fact that sigma is itself admissible. And then you can prove that the modulus of gamma is less than or equal to the modulus of the image. And you get the reverse inequality by symmetry. So this property is just an exercise using change variables. So a basic example. So we are now in Rn. And I take an annulus. So I fix a point, x0 in Rn, and I take an annular region. And the family I consider is a family of all curves that join this sphere to the other one. Okay. And I would like to compute the conformal modulus of gamma. Again, this is the n modulus in my definition in the case of metric spaces. And this is equal to this quantity. So here, this is the area of the unit sphere. Okay. In particular, when R tends to 0, so n is bigger, it's at least 2. Where small r tends to 0, this quantity tends to infinity, so the modulus is 0. So in this case, the modulus of curve families that pass through a fixed point, so all the curves pass through a fixed point, then the modulus is 0. So we would like to prove this. So to prove this equality, we will prove two inequality. So one is very easy to get. So it's easy to get that the modulus is less than this quantity. So it's easy to have an upper bound for the modulus, because you have to find a good admissible function. So in this case, we consider rho of x. So we assume that x0 is 0. It's not a big deal, because the conformal modulus is conformal invariant, so I can assume that x0 is 0. So the function is log of r over r minus 1 times the norm of x to the power minus 1. So we have to check that rho is admissible. But it's very easy to prove this, because we have a curve gamma here. And we would like to prove that the integral of this function along this curve is bigger than 1. But because this function is rho is radial, the integral along gamma is bigger than the integral along the Euclidean segment that joins the extremity, the endpoints of the curve gamma. But if you compute the integral of this function along this segment, you get 1. It's totally obvious. Maybe, sorry. Okay. So rho is admissible, it's easy. Now you have to integrate. It's easy to compute that. By definition, the modulus of gamma is less than the integral on the annulus of rho to the n. And now you compute this function is radial, you use polar coordinates, and you prove that this is less than what we want. Okay? So now I would like to prove that the modulus is bigger than. And it's very difficult in a general case to prove such an estimate. So it's difficult to have a lower bound in general. But here we can do. So how to do this? So let rho be an admissible function from of curve family gamma. And I have to prove that the integral of rho n is bigger than this quantity here. Well, what I do is just I take a unit vector, so let W is in the sphere. On the claim, the first claim is that because rho is admissible, this integral is bigger than 1. Okay, so it is integrates along this curve here, in this direction W. Now I write this like this. Sorry. And we use Hölder inequality. So we get here we get the integral between small r and capital R of 1 over t to the power n minus 1 over n. But this is so I get that this integral is bigger than log of r, small capital R over small r to the power n divided by n minus 1. Now, to compute, I have to compute this quantity. I use polar coordinates. I get that the integral of rho n is integral on Sn minus 1 of this quantity on the claim is proved. So I would like to emphasize on the fact that we have a miracle here, because we are able to give a lower bound of the modulus. So if you consider the general case, I assume that so x d mu is a metric measure space. I assume that mu is L-force regular of dimension q. This means that mu of a ball, the measure of a ball of radius r is comparable to r to the q. So C is a fixed constant, and this is true for any x, any r. So again, if I consider an annulus in my metric measure space, so gamma is again the curve of families that go from this ball, this small ball, outside the big ball. Then you can prove that the Q modulus of gamma, so P is equal to Q here, because in some sense, Q is the dimension of the metric space. In fact, with my definition of L-force regularity, Q is the Hausdorff dimension of the metric measure space. So Q is the natural dimension associated to the space. Like here, I consider the N modulus in the case of N Riemannian manifold. So we obtain the same lower bound. The same upper bound, sorry. But in general, I don't have the upper bound. In general, it's not true. And we will see that, in fact, when we have this lower bound, we have what is called a Loevner space. And in Loevner spaces, we have a good theory of quasi-conformal mappings. So is what I would like to explain later. If you would like to prove this inequality, again, you have to find an admissible function. And the admissible function is exactly the same as in the Euclidean case. The main point is to compute, so rho is log of small r, of capital R, sorry, over small r to the power -1. And you replace the modulus of x by the distance between x naught and x to the power -1. You prove that rho is admissible, so it's not difficult. And then you have to compute the integral of rho to the q. But you are not in the Euclidean case. You cannot use polar coordinates. But you can show that, in fact, this is less than this quantity. Again, it's an exercise. It's not difficult, but it's a good exercise in measure theory. So I say that if I have a lower bound for the Q modulus, in this case, I have a space which is called a Loevner space. So now I describe what are Loevner spaces. On the Poincare inequality. So again, let x d mu be a metric measure space we assume that given 2 points, in my space capital X, there exists a rectifiable curve that joins X to Y. It's just a technical assumption. So let E on F be two non-degenerate continua. So this means that they are compact, connected sets that are not reduced to one point. Now we define gamma of EF. So it just I do a picture. You have E, you have F. As previously, gamma of EF is the family of curve joining E to F. So this is gamma of E. When I define the P modulus of E on F is the P modulus of gamma of E on F. So another notation, it's delta of E on F is the distance between divided by the minimum of the diameter of E, diameter of F. This is called, in geometry, relative distance. So I define what is a Loevner space. So again, a Loevner space is a space is a space in which we control the Q modulus. We have a lower bound for the Q modulus. So let Q be bigger than 1. I will explain why Q should not be equal to 1. We say that X is a Q Loevner space if there exists an isomorphism eta from 0 plus infinity to itself, so that the Q modulus of gamma of E on F is less than eta times delta of E on F. So you control the Q modulus by the relative distance for any choice of E on F continua. Non-degenerate continua. Okay. So this definition is due to Heinonen and Koskela. Maybe I can give an example. We have already seen that Rn is an n-Loebner space. So when I say Rn, is Rn equipped with the Euclidean distance on the Lebesgue measure. So it's an n-Loebner space. Carnot groups are Q-Loebner, where Q is a homogeneous distance. For instance, the Heisenberg group is a Loebner space. And there are exotic examples. More exotic examples. For any Q bigger than 1, there exists a Q alpha singular. Q-Loebner space. Here I should say that R is not a Loebner space. It's why I put here Q should be bigger than, strictly bigger than 1. Okay, the problem is if I give you a metric measure space and I ask you to check is this space a Loebner space, it's very difficult to prove that you have a Loebner space or to prove that you don't have a Loebner space. So one method is to study Poincaré inequalities. So now I go to Poincaré inequality. So maybe I can give the Poincaré inequality in the classical case, I mean in the case of Rn, or on a manifold. It says that on a ball, if you take U minus the average of U on this ball, you integrate with respect to the Lebesgue measure, is less than some constant times the diameter of B. And you have so you are in Rn, you take a smooth function U, B is a ball, U of B is the mean value of U on this ball, and this is the length of the gradient. So you control the oscillation of the function in the ball by the length of the gradient. So this is in Rn. Or on a smooth manifold. Now, I'm interested by the case of metric measure spaces. So I would like to give a meaning of this inequality in a metric measure space. So this part here is okay because I need only a measure. The problem is define what is this quantity here, and don't have a gradient in a metric measure space in general. Okay? So for this, we introduce the notion of upper gradient. So you have a function U and X. Here I cannot assume that the function is smooth, it does not make sense. So say that this function is continuous. And we would like to define a notion of length of gradient. So we say that a function rho from x into r plus, but that function could be equal to infinity, is an upper gradient of u if we have the following property. If you take 2 points x and y in my space capital X, you take gamma a rectifiable curve joining x and y, you will like that u of x minus u of y is less than or equal to the integral of my upper gradient along the curve. Okay. So some comments on remarks, on examples. Maybe start with examples. Assume that you are in a Rn. Assume that U is smooth, then rho 0, which is equal to the norm of the gradient of U, is an upper gradient, of course. It's a fundamental theorem of calculus. Moreover, if rho is another upper gradient, we have that rho naught, this is the length of the gradient, is less or equal to u. It's less or equal, so another, if rho is another upper gradient, is bigger than the length of the gradient. Another example is if u is a Lipschitz function, if you take rho is the Lipschitz constant of u, and I don't give the precise definition of the Lipschitz constant, you can take every Lipschitz constant. I mean, local Lipschitz constant or everything you want is an upper gradient. So in general, you have a lot of upper gradients associated to a function u. In particular, I can take the function which is equal to infinity everywhere, and this function is an upper gradient of every function u. So you have always an upper gradient, but maybe this upper gradient is a trivial one. I mean, it's a function which is equal to infinity everywhere. So now I can give the definition of the Poincare inequality. So we say that x d mu support a 1p Poincare inequality if there exists a constant c. So that, and I copy this inequality, but I replace the length of the gradient by rho, and I ask that this inequality is true for every choice of upper gradient. And I put some power P here. That's why I call this 1P Poincare inequality. So B is a ball in the metric measure space. U is a continuous function, any continuous function in B. And rho is any choice of an upper gradient of U. I don't ask that this inequality is true for one particular choice of an upper gradient, because I say that rho is equal to infinity is always an upper gradient. So this inequality is trivial in this case. So I ask that this inequality is true for any choice of an upper gradient. So this is true for any ball B, for any continuous function, for any upper gradient of U. So this is, again, this is the mean value of this quantity over the ball B. Okay, it's clear, this inequality. So again, some remark. So the 1-1 Poincare inequality implies the 1P Poincare inequality. By Hölder inequality. So the 1-1 is the strongest one. Okay. Let me give an example. Most of the time, this theorem is given to Boozer, Peter Boozer. Let M be a manifold, Riemannian manifold. And manifold. With non-negative Ricci curvature. Then N admits a 1-1 Poincare inequality. Okay, I will give an idea of the proof. So the proof I will present to you is due to Koreva and Schoen. If you don't know what is the Ricci curvature, it's okay, you can understand the proof, which is very elementary. Idea of the proof. So given 2 points on my manifold, I choose a geodesic joining x to y. I note this gamma of x, y. But in fact, for almost every point, this geodesic is unique. So forget the almost every point. Okay, assume that for every x and y, you have a unique geodesic, so it's gamma of x and y. If you are outside the cut locus, you have this property. So So you parameterize this geodesic by arc length. So by choice, gamma of xy is given as because of uniqueness. Okay, so now I can prove. So we fix a ball. B in M of radius R. Now, if I have a continuous function on an upper gradient, by definition, u of x minus u of y is less or equal to the integral along this curve of rho of S. S, what I can write like this, is the distance between 0 and the distance, is the integral between 0 and the distance between x and y of rho of gamma xy of t dt. I use just the definition of an upper gradient. Okay, now I have to compute the integral over the ball of u minus ub. So this is the Riemannian volume. But this quantity is not difficult to see that this quantity is 1 over the volume of the ball. So this quantity is here, 1 over the volume of the ball. Integral of b, integral of b over b of u of x minus u of y dx dy. Maybe less or equal. Just I return what is the mean value. Now I use this inequality here. So I get 1 over the volume of B, integral over B, integral over B, integral between 0 and the distance between x and y of rho of gamma x1 of t dt dx dy. Now, this integral, I write this integral into two parts. I integrate over this segment, so between 0 and the distance between x and y divided by 2, plus this integral. But here, in this integral, I set S is equal to d of x, y minus t. So this integral here becomes integral between okay. Then I get rho, but by this property here, I integrate this function. So SDS. By this change of variable, I use this relation here. Now I put this and this here. I use the symmetry in x and y. When I get that this quantity here is less than what we get is that the integral over b of u minus ub is less than 2 mu of b. Integral on b, integral on b, and you integrate between the distance between x and y divided by 2 and the distance of x and y, and we have dt dx dy. Okay, so I repeat, I just put this part here, and I use the fact that this expression is symmetric in x and y to get this equality. And now I explain how to use the fact that the manifold has non-negative Ricci curvature. So set phi I change the notation. And I would like to estimate the Jacobian of phi. For me, it's the limit where n tends to 0 of the volume of phi of xt of b of yr divided by the volume of the ball. And the claim is that this quantity is bigger of what happens in the Euclidean case. So if I'm right, you get this. So why? What we have x, and we have this ball. And what is this quantity here? You join here, in the Euclidean case, for instance, if you are in Rn, I join this point here, the point of this in this ball to x by geodesics, by straight lines, and I stop along this geodesic, at time t. So I get something like this. So this is phi in the Euclidean case. Okay? And the claim here is to say that in the case of a manifold with non-negative Ricci curvature, the space is more curved. So this picture you should have in mind something like this. So the intermediate set here is bigger than the set you obtain in the Euclidean case. So this is not a proof. In order to prove this inequality is Bishop-Gromov. But the picture you should have in mind is this one. So it's possible. So know how to conclude. Here I can put some constant c. I put here the Jacobian of this. And then you make a change of variable. Because here it's phi of x dy. You set z is equal to phi of x dy. You make a change of variable and you do the computation and you get what you want. So the end of the proof is just a change of variable and you have to take care of the set you integrate. So then just an exercise of measure theory. It's possible for a metric measure space to define a notion of synthetic Ricci curvature. And in this in this case, we can prove that if a metric measure space has positive, non-negative synthetic Ricci curvature, then you have a Poincaré inequality up to some technical assumptions. And how to do this? To do this, we use optimal mass transportation. So, it's just to say that I organized a workshop, a summer school, sorry, in Grenoble about optimal mass transportation. And some mini courses will be about Ricci curvature, on how to use optimal mass transportation to study Ricci flow or to study Ricci curvature in some abstract setting. Okay. So the connection between Poincaré inequality and the Loevner condition is the following. So this is the theorem of Heinonen and Koskela. Let x d mu be a proper. Proper means that closed balls are compact. QL force regular metric measure space. Then X is Q Loevner. If only if X admits the 1Q Poincaré inequality. So, for instance, if you know what is a Carnot group equipped with these Carnot-Caratodori distances admit a 1-1 Poincaré inequality. It's an odd result of Varro-Poulos. So you have that Carnot groups are Loevner spaces. It's more easy to prove that a space has a Poincaré inequality than to prove that he has the Loevner condition. Now I go to quasi-conformal mappings. Maybe I can explain what is the beginning of the theory of quasi-conformal mappings. So this is a problem due to Grotsch. So you have a square in the complex plane. And you take a rectangle, again, in the complex plane, and you assume that this rectangle is not a square. So it's well known that you cannot say conformally R to S, and you send vertices to vertices. It's not possible to find a conformal homomorphism from R to S such that one vertex is sent to one vertex. Okay. And the problem of the Grotsch is what is the most conformal mapping that can do the job? And the answer is a quasi-conformal mapping. And to solve this problem, Grotsch introduced what I call the conformal modulus. Not exactly in the same way, but almost in the same way. So again, let x d mu be a metric measure space. So we sorry. I take two metric spaces. And I take an homomorphism from X to Y. On I would like to define what is a quasi-conformal homomorphism. So for this, I have to define what is the dilation. So maybe I should first give an idea of what is a conformal mapping. So I take a ball in X. I take his image by my homomorphism F. Assume that you have something like this. So here I have f of x. And first, I take the biggest ball with center f of x that is contained in the image of the ball. So I get something like this. And then I get the smallest ball that contains the image of the ball. And homomorphism is quasi-conformal if you control uniformly in X on R the ratio of the big radius over the small radius. So I will call this small f of X on R, and I will call this big L of X on R. So formally, the definition as follow. So capital F of X on R is the supremum of the distance between f of x, f on y, when the distance, so here we are in capital Y, here the distance in capital X between x and y is less than R. Small f of x on R is the infimum of the same quantity, almost the same quantity. So for some technical reasons, here I assume that this distance is less or equal, and here is bigger or equal, but you can assume that you have equality. In Rn, it's okay. And we define the dilation as the ratio of these two quantities. And I say that f is quasi-conformal if I control this quantity. Okay? But I will write this more precisely. We say that f, so this homomorphism, is first quasi-conformal, what I call QC, if there exists K, so that the lim sup, when R tends to 0, of the dilation is uniformly controlled. So it is for any x, any radius. We say that f is weakly quasi-symmetric if you have this control, but for any x on R, and without this lim 2. So we are exactly in this case here. But for quasi-conformal mappings, you have this control, but for small radius. And you say that f is quasi-symmetric if there exists an homomorphism such that you have this condition. If you control the distance between 3 points like this, in X, you control the distances between the image in the same way. So for any t, any x, any a, any b. Okay, so I claim first in general you have this. So it's true for general metric spaces. For general metric spaces, sorry. It's not difficult to see that if you have a quasi-symmetric homomorphism, its inverse is also a quasi-symmetric homomorphism. And if you take the composition of two quasi-symmetric homomorphisms, you get a quasi-symmetric homomorphism. It's not easy to see that you have the same properties for these two types of homomorphisms. Another remark is that if you take a bi-Lipschitz homomorphism, a bi-Lipschitz homomorphism is obviously quasi-symmetric. You can compute eta with respect to the bi-Lipschitz constant of the homomorphism. It turns out that in Rn, all these three conditions are equivalent. It's a big achievement of the theory to prove that, in fact, in Rn, all these conditions are equivalent. And better could be said, because here I can replace lim sub by lim inf. And again, this condition is equivalent to the other one. It turns out that in Loevner spaces, you have the same thing. So, theorem. So you take I need a measure, I will explain why. So there are B2 Q alpha regular, Q Loeffner spaces. Let F be an homomorphism. Then the following assertions are equivalent. So F is quasi-conformal. F is weakly quasi-symmetric. F is quasi-conformal. And F quasi-preserves the Q modulus. So this means that there exists a constant, the Q modulus. There exists a constant C. So that if you take the Q modulus of the image of curve family, it's comparable to the Q modulus of the curve family. Moreover, in this case, F is absolutely continuous in measure and is continuous on all curves of X. So this means that you have a Radon-Nikodym derivative of F. And here this means that if you take any curve gamma in X, F rho gamma is absolutely continuous. It's a curve, and suppose that you say that F is absolutely continuous along this curve, is F rho gamma is continuous. It's absolutely continuous. Sorry. So these definitions are usually called metric definitions of quasi-conformality. This definition is usually called geometric definition. So this theorem says that in the setting of Loeffner spaces, all the metric definitions are equivalent to the geometric definition. If you know the theory of quasi-conformal mappings in Rn, you have also an analytic definition in terms of Sobolev spaces. It's possible to give also an analytic definition in metric measure spaces and to prove that, again, this definition is equivalent to the other one. But it's difficult to define what is a Sobolev spaces for functions between two metric spaces. To conclude, I would like just to give a more precise result in Rn. So this is called the Rademacher-Stepanov theorem. So let F be a quasi-conformal homomorphism. So because Rn is Rn and Rm are Loeffner spaces, in fact, F satisfies one of these conditions. Then F is differentiable almost everywhere with respect to the Lebesgue measure. and its differential is also quasi-conformal. So it's a more precise result than this here, of course. But I am in Rn. I should say that in the setting of Loevner spaces, there is a version of this theorem. It's due to Jeff Shiger. But you see that in a metric measure spaces, it's not clear what is this meaning of f is differentiable. But Shiger has a way to construct some kind of differential associated to a map between metric measure spaces. And he proved an analog of this result in this very general setting. So the analytic part of my talk is finished. So tomorrow we will see that if we start with a quasi-isometry between on the real hyperbolic n space, then this quasi-isometry induces on the boundary a quasi-conformal homomorphism. And to use this, we will first define what is first I will explain what is a hyperbolic space in the sense of Gromov. I will define in this setting what is a cross ratio, what are so I need the cross ratio. I need what I call quasi-projections. And then I will explain what happens in the case of the hyperbolic space. And then I will prove this result of Margulis and explain that this theorem of Margulis is true in a very general setting of hyperbolic spaces in the sense of Gromov. So all the tools, I mean cross ratio and so on, have a meaning in a very general setting, and we can use them to prove a very general result of a Margulis type. Okay, thank you for your attention. You have questions?